"Where," said the Duke of Harcourt, looking at the two daughters arranged before him like pastries in a shop window, "is the other one?" Mrs. Pennington's smile did not falter, though something behind her eyes did. "The other one, Your Grace? Why, these are my daughters, Gwendolen and Arabella. I assure you, there is no other." "There is another," said the Duke. "A young woman named Margaret. I was given to understand she lives in this house. I should like to see her." It was a cold, bright morning in the drawing-room of Fenwick Grange, and the whole of the visit had been staged, over 3 frantic days, for exactly one purpose: to display Mrs. Pennington's 2 marriageable daughters to the Duke of Harcourt, who was known to be seeking a wife, and who had, to the astonishment and delirious joy of the neighborhood, written to request the honor of calling. Every candle in the house had been lit, the good silver had been polished, Gwendolen and Arabella had been laced into their finest gowns, and coached for 3 days in their accomplishments, their curtsies, their modest downcast eyes. Nothing had been left to chance, except that the Duke of Harcourt, who was supposed to be dazzled by Gwendolen's fine complexion and Arabella's skill at the harp, had walked into the drawing-room, bowed with cold precision, declined tea, and asked, before he had so much as sat down, for Margaret, who was not supposed to exist, who had most certainly not been mentioned in any of Mrs. Pennington's careful correspondence, and who was, at that precise moment, 3 floors below in the scullery, up to her elbows in the washing up, in a dress that had been turned twice, and a cap that hid her hair, exactly where Mrs. Pennington had made very sure she would remain for the whole of the Duke's visit. For Margaret Fenwick was the difficulty. Margaret Fenwick was, in fact, the true daughter of the house, the child of the late Mr. Fenwick, whose house this had been, whose name it bore, and who had died when Margaret was 14, and left her, in the way of these stories, to the care of the stepmother he had unwisely married in his last years. And Mrs. Pennington, who had brought 2 daughters of her own into the marriage, and no fortune to speak of, had spent the 6 years since Mr. Fenwick's death performing a quiet, total, and profitable substitution. She had installed her own girls as the daughters of the house, and reduced Margaret, the actual heiress, the actual daughter, the actual Fenwick, to something between a poor relation and a servant, a drudge who kept the accounts and mended the linen and worked in the kitchen, and whom the neighborhood had been given quite firmly to understand was a sad, simple creature, not quite right, not fit to be seen, best kept out of the way. It was a lie, and a cruel one, and it had worked for 6 years, because a woman with the keys to a house and a confident manner can make a neighborhood believe almost anything, and no one had troubled to look closely at the quiet girl in the kitchen, and Margaret herself had long since stopped expecting anyone to. "Margaret," Mrs. Pennington said, recovering, "is my late husband's daughter, Your Grace, and I am afraid, it grieves me to say it, she is not quite, she is a delicate creature, simple, you understand, not able to bear company or conversation. We keep her comfortable and quiet, as is kindest. She could not possibly be presented. She would not know what to do. It would distress her terribly. But Gwendolen and Arabella, I should like to see her," the Duke of Harcourt repeated. "Now, if you please, and I should like to see her alone." The temperature of the room dropped several degrees. Gwendolen's practiced smile curdled. Arabella's hand, poised near her harp, went still. And Mrs. Pennington, for the first time in 6 years of confident lying, found herself facing a person who did not appear to be listening to her at all. "Your Grace, I really must insist. Margaret is not, it would not be proper, a young woman, alone, with, and in her condition of mind." Mrs. Pennington. The Duke of Harcourt did not raise his voice. He did not need to. There was in it a quiet, unbending authority that made further argument feel like shouting at a stone wall. "I am going to be direct, because I dislike wasting a morning, and I have already wasted a good deal of this one. I know that Margaret Fenwick is the daughter of this house. I know that this house, and the estate it sits on, are hers, were left to her by her father, and are held, until her majority or her marriage, in a trust of which you are merely the administrator. I know that she is not simple, and not delicate, and not incapable of company, because I have it on excellent authority that she runs the whole of this household, keeps its accounts better than any steward, and is, by every account I have troubled to gather, the cleverest and kindest person under this roof. And I know that you have spent 6 years telling the neighborhood otherwise, and dressing your own daughters in her family's consequence, and keeping her in the kitchen, and that you have this very morning hidden her below stairs, so that I might be shown your daughters instead. I know all of this, madam. I did not come here by accident, and I did not come to be shown pastries in a window. I came for Margaret Fenwick. Now, you may send for her, and let me see her, alone, with all courtesy. Or I may go down to the scullery and find her myself, which will be a great deal more embarrassing for everyone, and which I am entirely prepared to do. Choose quickly. The silence in the drawing-room was absolute, and Mrs. Pennington, staring at the Duke of Harcourt with the dawning horror of a woman whose 6-year confidence trick has just collapsed in a single morning, understood that she was beaten, that somehow, impossibly, the Duke knew everything, and that there was nothing left to do but obey. And she rang the bell, with a hand that was not quite steady, and told the astonished footman to fetch Miss Margaret up from the kitchen, at once, exactly as she was. Margaret Fenwick came up from the scullery in a wet apron, with soap to her elbows and a smudge of ash on her cheek, and her hair bundled under a servant's cap, because there had been no time to make her presentable, and Mrs. Pennington had not, in her panic, thought to allow any, had, in fact, some spiteful instinct making her hope that the Duke, seeing the drudge in all her drudgery, would be repelled and turn back to the daughters after all. And Margaret, summoned without explanation from her dishes, walked into the grand drawing-room in her wet apron and stopped just inside the door, blinking in the bright morning light, entirely bewildered to find herself standing before the finest gathering the house had seen in years, and a tall, dark stranger who was looking at her, the kitchen drudge, as though she were the only person in the room. "Miss Fenwick," said the Duke of Harcourt, and he rose, and he bowed to her, bowed to the girl in the apron, deeply and with perfect courtesy, exactly as one bows to a lady of consequence, and Margaret heard Gwendolen make a small strangled sound. "Forgive the intrusion of my visit and the abruptness of my summons. I am the Duke of Harcourt. I have asked to see you, and to see you alone, with your stepmother's leave, and in full propriety, the door open and the servants near, because I have something to say to you that I would rather say to you directly, and not through the arrangement that has been made for my benefit this morning. Will you sit? You have been standing over a washtub, I think, and I have kept you from your work, and I am sorry for it, though I hope you will forgive me when you understand why." Margaret did not sit. She stood in her wet apron and stared at the Duke of Harcourt, and then at her stepmother, whose face was a study in fury, barely masked by terror, and then back at the Duke, and something in her, some long-buried spark of the girl she had been before 6 years of the kitchen, made her lift her chin and speak. "Your Grace," she said, and her voice was low and steady, roughened by disuse but clear. "I do not understand what is happening, and I have learned, in this house, to be very careful of things I do not understand, because they are usually traps. So before I sit, or forgive you, or anything else, I should like to know plainly what you want. I am the kitchen girl. I have been the kitchen girl for 6 years, and you are a duke, and you have interrupted a morning arranged entirely so that you might admire my stepsisters, to ask instead for me, by name, and to bow to me as though I were someone. Things like that do not happen to girls like me, Your Grace, not without a reason, and usually not a kind one. So tell me the reason. What do you want with the kitchen girl? Be plain. I have no patience left for anything else. I used it all up somewhere around the 3rd year of the washing." And the Duke of Harcourt, who had come to Fenwick Grange braced to find a cowed and broken drudge, and had found instead a woman who walked out of a scullery in a wet apron, and demanded, of a duke, that he state his business, felt the same thing every duke in these stories feels at exactly this moment, which was the swift and total certainty that he had found precisely what he had come looking for, and that it was even better than he had dared to hope. "That," he said, "is exactly the reason, Miss Fenwick, though you could not know it. Sit, or stand, as you prefer, but let me tell you why I am here, plainly, as you have asked. because you have more than earned a plain answer, and I suspect you have had very few of them in 6 years. 3 months ago, the Duke of Harcourt said, on a night of hard rain, an old woman was turned away from the door of this house. She was traveling to me. She had been my nurse when I was a boy, and later my mother's companion. And she is, I will tell you plainly, one of the 2 or 3 people in this world I love, without reservation. Her name is Mrs. Coombe. She is old, and that night she was ill, a fever coming on, and her carriage had broken an axle in the lane, and she came to the nearest house, which was this one, and asked only for shelter from the storm until the morning. And your stepmother, he did not look at Mrs. Pennington, but the whole room heard the ice in it. Your stepmother refused her, turned a sick old woman back into the rain, because she did not care to be troubled, and because Mrs. Coombe, in her plain traveling clothes, did not look worth the trouble, sent her away to find shelter where she could, on a night that might well have killed her. Margaret had gone very still. But she did not die, the Duke went on, and she did not have to find shelter where she could, because before she had gone 100 yards down the lane, a young woman came running after her in the rain. A young woman in a servant's cap who had heard the whole exchange from the scullery window and who could not bear it. And that young woman brought Mrs. Coombe in through the kitchen door, quietly, without her stepmother's knowledge, and sat up with her the whole night in the warm kitchen, and brought down blankets and hot broth and her own dry shawl, and tended her fever until it broke near dawn, and then, because she knew there would be trouble if the old woman were found, helped her away before the household woke, with a basket of food and directions to the wheelwright, and asked for nothing, and gave no name, and said only, when Mrs. Coombe pressed her, that she was no one, only the kitchen girl, and that Mrs. Coombe must not mention it, or there would be trouble. The Duke's voice had gone rough. Mrs. Coombe came to me, Miss Fenwick, and she told me that story, and she told it weeping, because in all her long life, she had never been shown a kindness so complete, by a person who had so little, and stood to gain so nothing, and risked so much to give it. She had nothing, and she gave me everything, and she called herself no one. Mrs. Coombe said to me, find her, my boy. Find out who that girl is, and see that the world knows what she is, because I will not die easy knowing a soul that fine is hidden in a kitchen being called no one. So I found her. It took some doing, and what I found, when I looked into the kitchen girl at Fenwick Grange, was that she was no kitchen girl at all. She was the daughter and heiress of the house, defrauded of her name and her inheritance, and her whole life by a stepmother who kept her below stairs and told the world she was simple. And I found, the more I looked, that she was exactly the person Mrs. Coombe had described, the cleverest and kindest soul under this roof, hidden, dismissed, called no one. And I found that I did not wish to leave her there. That is why I am here, Miss Fenwick. That is the whole plain reason you asked for. Not to admire your stepsisters, to find the girl who ran into the rain for a sick old stranger and called herself no one, and to tell her, to her face, in front of everyone, that she is not no one, and never was, and that the world is about to learn it. The drawing room was utterly silent. Margaret Fenwick stood in her wet apron with her hand pressed to her mouth, and the Duke saw that she was trembling, and that the fierce guardedness with which she had demanded his business had cracked clean through, because this, being seen, being known, being named, was the one thing 6 years of the kitchen had not prepared her to withstand. You came, she whispered, because I helped Mrs. Coombe, because of one night you found out my whole, you looked into all of it, because I sat up with a sick old woman one night, 3 months ago, that I had entirely forgotten. You had forgotten it, the Duke said gently, because you do such things so often that one more is not worth remembering to you. That is precisely what makes it worth everything. A person who remembers their kindnesses is keeping a ledger. A person who forgets them is simply kind. You forgot the finest thing anyone has done for someone I love, because to you it was Tuesday. Yes, Miss Fenwick, I came because of one night. One night was enough. It told me everything about you that 6 years of your stepmother's lies had tried to hide, and I have spent 3 months confirming it. And now I am here, and the first thing I am going to do, before anything else, before I say the other thing I have come to say, is set right what was done to you." He turned, at last, to Mrs. Pennington, and his voice changed entirely, from warmth to a cold that made Gwendolen shrink back. "Madam, I have consulted the trust, and the law, and Miss Fenwick's father's will, all of which you appear to have imagined no one would ever trouble to read. This house is hers. This estate is hers. The income you have spent on your own daughter's gowns for 6 years is hers, every shilling of it, and you have administered it in flagrant breach of trust, which is not merely shameful but criminal, and which I have the documentation to prove. You have defrauded your late husband's daughter of her home, her fortune, her name, and her place in the world, and you have kept her in a kitchen and called her simple to cover the theft. That is over. As of this morning, it is over. Miss Fenwick is restored to her own, her house, her fortune, her name, all of it. And you, madam, will render a full account of your administration, and repay what can be repaid. And consider yourself extremely fortunate that Miss Fenwick is a kinder person than you have ever been, because it will be for her to decide whether you are prosecuted or merely dismissed, and I would not, were I you, presume too far upon her mercy." Mrs. Pennington had gone the color of tallow. Gwendolen had begun to cry. Arabella was staring at Margaret. Margaret in her wet apron. Margaret the kitchen drudge. Margaret whom they had ordered about for 6 years, as though seeing her for the first time, which in a sense she was. And Margaret Fenwick stood in the middle of it, restored in a single morning to everything that had been taken from her, and found that she was not, as she might have expected, triumphant. She was something quieter and stranger. She was seen. After 6 years of being no one, she had been found, and named, and restored, and all because she had run into the rain one night for a sick old woman, exactly as she had run 100 times for 100 people, expecting nothing, remembering nothing. The world had told her, for 6 years, that her kindness was worthless, that she was worthless, that she should keep her head down and her hopes lower. And the world had been wrong, and here was the proof of it, in the shape of a duke who had crossed the county, because an old woman would not die easy, knowing a fine soul was hidden in a kitchen. "I do not know what to say," Margaret managed. "I have imagined, in 6 years, I imagined a great many rescues, Your Grace, in the way that people in kitchens do, foolish daydreams to get through the washing. But I never imagined it would come because of a kindness I had forgotten. I thought, if it ever came, it would have to be because I had done something clever, or fought my way out, or earned it, somehow, largely. And instead, it has come because of the smallest thing, a thing I did not even keep in my memory. That is," her voice broke, "that is almost harder to bear than the cruelty was. That it turned on something so small. That someone was watching, after all, when I thought no one ever was." "Someone was watching," the Duke of Harcourt said. "Someone is always watching, Miss Fenwick, though we rarely know who or when. That is the secret the cruel never learn, and the kind never need to, that the small kindnesses done in the dark, for nothing, remembered by no one, those are the ones that come back, in the end, and change everything. You were kind when you thought no one would ever know, and that is the only kind of goodness that is truly worth anything, and the world is about to spend a great deal of time being astonished that the simple kitchen girl was, all along, the finest person in the county, and I am going to enjoy watching it, more than I have enjoyed anything in years." That night, her first night restored to her father's house, sleeping for the first time in 6 years, in a proper bedchamber, instead of the cold little room off the scullery. Margaret lay awake and remembered the night of Mrs. Combe, which she had genuinely almost forgotten, and which had turned out to be the hinge on which her whole life had swung. She remembered it now in pieces, the storm. Her stepmother's voice at the front door, sharp and dismissive. "We've no room for tramping women. Be off." The old woman's face in the lantern light, gray and shaking with fever, too proud to beg and too ill to argue, turning away into the rain. And Margaret at the scullery window, watching, feeling the thing she always felt when she watched cruelty done and could not stop it, the helpless burning of it. And then, this once, not being able to bear it, slipping out the kitchen door into the wet dark, and running down the lane after the old woman, calling softly, "Come back, come in through the kitchen, come and be warm." She needn't know. She remembered the night that followed. The old woman by the kitchen fire, wrapped in Margaret's own shawl. The broth, the way the fever had risen in the small hours, and Margaret had sat holding the frail hot hand and talking softly to keep the old woman from her fear. And Mrs. Coombe, in a lucid moment near dawn, gripping Margaret's hand and looking at her with sharp, clear eyes and saying, "Who are you, child, that you would do this? Go against your own household in the dead of night, for a stranger, and ask nothing?" And Margaret answering, the way she always answered, "No one, ma'am, only the kitchen girl. It's nothing. Everyone should have somewhere warm on a night like this. It's only what's right." She had thought no more of it. She had helped Mrs. Coombe away before the house woke, with a basket and directions, and a warning to mention it to no one, and she had gone back to her dishes, and the whole night had sunk into the gray, undifferentiated mass of 6 years of the kitchen. One small kindness among 1,000, none of them remembered, none of them expected to matter. She had not known she was being seen. She had believed, that night as every night, that no one was watching, that her kindnesses fell into the dark and vanished, that she was exactly what she called herself, no one. And now, lying awake in her restored bedchamber, Margaret understood the thing that would shape the rest of her life, that she had been wrong, that someone had been watching after all, not in the moment, but the kindness itself had been a kind of watching, had gone out into the world and been carried, by a grateful old woman, all the way to a duke, and had come back 3 months later and lifted her out of the kitchen entirely. She had cast her small bread upon the waters, as she had cast 1,000 others, expecting nothing, and this one, unaccountably, had come back 100-fold. And she thought, how many others are out there then? The 1,000 kindnesses I have forgotten. Where have they gone? Whom have they touched? I will never know, but this one came back. This one I can see. And if this one came back, then perhaps none of them were ever truly lost. Perhaps every small warmth I ever gave in the dark, believing it wasted, went somewhere and did something, and mattered, though I will never know how. And she wept, a little, in the dark of her restored room. Not from grief now, but from a kind of overwhelmed wonder. The wonder of a person who has just discovered that a life she believed had been entirely wasted, entirely unwitnessed, entirely no one, had in fact been seen all along by the only witness that finally matters, which is the world itself, keeping its slow, patient account, and paying it back, at last, in full. She resolved, that first free night, that she would never stop, that whatever came of the Duke and his strange courtship, she would go on being kind in the dark for nothing, exactly as she always had. Only now she would do it knowing what she had not known before, that it was never wasted, that someone was always, in the end, watching, and that there was no such thing, anywhere in the world, as no one. He did not propose that morning. He was too wise for that, and too honorable, and he understood, as Margaret herself would have insisted had he not, that a woman cannot be rescued and proposed to in the same breath without the two becoming hopelessly tangled, so that neither party can ever be sure whether it was love or gratitude, freedom or its price. So the Duke of Harcourt did a thing that surprised the county nearly as much as the Restoration itself. Having set Margaret Fenwick back in possession of her house and fortune, he left. He installed a trustworthy steward and an unimpeachable older cousin of his own as chaperone companion for Margaret. He saw Mrs. Pennington and her daughters removed to a small property. Margaret coldly, but not cruelly, allotted them, and then he took his leave, telling Margaret only that he hoped she would permit him to call, in the ordinary way, as any gentleman calls upon a lady, now that she was, restored to herself, precisely that, a lady, an heiress, mistress of her own house, free. "You have been the kitchen girl for 6 years," he told her before he went. "You have been told what to do, and where to stand, and what you were worth, by people who wished you ill, every day of it. I will not now become one more person who arranges your life for you, however kindly meant. You are free, Miss Fenwick, truly free, for the first time since your father died, and the first thing a person should do with freedom is use it. So use it. Run your house. Take your place in the county. Discover what you want, now that you are finally allowed to want things. And if, somewhere in the discovering, you should find that you would welcome the calls of a certain duke who thinks you the finest woman in England, then you will tell me, and I will be the happiest man alive. But you will tell me freely, from a position of your own, or not at all. I did not restore your freedom in order to immediately ask you to give it up to me. Take it, live in it, and we shall see, in time, what you choose. I can wait. I have found that the things most worth having are exactly the things worth waiting for. And so he courted her, but slowly and properly, and only after she was fully herself, so that every step of it was her free choice and not the reflex of a rescued woman toward her rescuer. It took the better part of a year, and it was a joy to both of them. For Margaret, restored to her house and her consequence, bloomed, the guarded, exhausted drudge giving way, month by month, to the clever, warm, confident woman she had been born to be, and had been forbidden to become. She took up the reins of her estate and ran it beautifully, having in fact run it in secret for years. She befriended the county, which was falling over itself to know the wronged heiress the Duke of Harcourt had restored. And here Margaret discovered one of the stranger fruits of her restoration, and handled it in a way that told the whole county what manner of woman it was now dealing with. For the very people who had, for 6 years, accepted without question that the Fenwick daughter was a simple creature best kept from view, who had dined at the Grange as Mrs. Pennington's guests, and never once wondered about the girl below stairs, who had passed Margaret in the village 100 times and looked straight through the drudge in the turned gown. These same people now came calling in their finest carriages, all warmth and delight, eager to claim acquaintance with the wronged heiress the Duke of Harcourt had so romantically restored. They had ignored the kitchen girl. They fell over themselves for the Duchess-to-be. And Margaret, receiving them in the drawing room that had so lately been forbidden her, understood exactly what she was watching, and had to decide what to do with it. She might have been cold to them. She had cause. Not one of them had looked at her in 6 years. Not one had troubled to wonder whether the simple girl was simple, or whether the confident stepmother's story was true. They had taken the easy version, the comfortable version, and looked away, as people do, from anything that might require them to be inconvenient. And now they smiled and flattered, and pretended they had always known there was something special about dear Margaret. She might have frozen them all, and been within her rights. She chose, instead, a gentler and more devastating thing. She was kind to them, and she let them see that she remembered. "How good of you to call," she would say, warmly, to some grand lady who had cut her dead in the village not 6 months before. "Do you know, I believe we have met, though you will not remember it. You dropped a glove outside the draper's, last winter, and I picked it up and returned it to you, and you thanked me without looking at me, because I was in my working clothes, and one does not look at such people. I did not mind. I was quite used to it. But I have such a good memory for faces, you see. One develops it, being invisible. One watches everyone, because no one is watching you. So I remember all of you, every kindness, and every cut. It is quite a remarkable education, invisibility. I recommend it to no one, but I will say, it teaches you exactly who people are, when they think it does not matter how they behave. Do sit down. I hold nothing against you, truly. I do not. You are only doing what everyone does, which is to look away from what is uncomfortable. But I will tell you that I have decided to spend my life doing the opposite, and I hope you will forgive me if, having been invisible, I now make rather a point of seeing everyone. It is the one gift my 6 years gave me, and I mean to use it." And the grand ladies of the county, thus gently and unforgettably reminded that the woman they now courted was the same woman they had spent years looking past, went home thoughtful, and some of them, the better ones, ashamed, and kinder afterward for it. For Margaret had found the perfect revenge, which was no revenge at all. She simply refused to let them pretend they had always seen her, and refused, at the same time, to punish them for not having, and left each of them to sit with the small, uncomfortable truth of their own blindness, which is a far more improving thing to sit with than mere resentment would have been. The county learned, that season, that the new mistress of Fenwick Grange forgot nothing and forgave everything, which is the most disarming combination a person can present, and it made her, within a year, not merely accepted but genuinely beloved, for there is nothing people come to love so much as someone who has seen the worst of them and chosen, with open eyes, to be gracious anyway. And she discovered, in the freedom he had insisted she keep, exactly what she wanted, which was, as it turned out, the Duke of Harcourt, but wanted now freely, from strength, chosen rather than clung to, which made all the difference in the world. He called through the spring and the summer. They rode out together over her lands and his. They talked, really talked, the way she had not talked to anyone in 6 years, about books and the estate and her father, whom the Duke was patient enough to let her grieve aloud at last. And Margaret discovered the man beneath the cold, formal Duke, the deep, buried kindness of him, the dry humor, the fierce private loyalty that had sent him across a county because an old nurse asked it, the loneliness in him that matched, in its way, her own. She had been hidden in a kitchen. He had been hidden behind a title, wanted by everyone for his rank, and known by almost no one for himself. Two people hidden in different ways, each recognizing the other. She fell in love with him slowly and completely, and this time there was no daydream desperation in it, no drowning grasp at a rescuer. It was the clear-eyed choice of a free woman who had considered the whole world now open to her and decided, deliberately, that she wanted this man in it. There was one afternoon that Margaret always thought of as the moment she stopped being afraid of her own happiness. The Duke had come to call and found her not in the drawing room but in the kitchen, the very kitchen where she had drudged for 6 years, standing over the great scrubbed table with her sleeves rolled up, and for a moment his face had gone carefully blank, as though he feared he had found her reduced again. But Margaret had laughed at his expression, the free, easy laugh she had only lately rediscovered, and held up her flour-dusted hands. "Do not look so stricken," she said. "I am not scrubbing anyone's dishes. I am making bread, because I want to, because I am good at it, and because there is a great difference, Julian, between doing a thing because you are forced to, and doing the very same thing because you choose to. For 6 years this kitchen was my prison, and I found, when I was free, that I did not want to abandon it. That would be letting them win, letting them make the kitchen only a place of misery. So I have taken it back. I come down and I bake, when I please, because I like the warmth and the smell of it, and the honest work of my own hands. And it is mine now, the kitchen, mine to enjoy instead of mine to suffer. It is the same room. I am a different woman in it. That is the whole of what freedom turned out to mean, I think. Not leaving the kitchen, but owning it. Sit down. You may watch a duchess-to-be make bread, if you can bear the loss of dignity, and if you are very good, I will let you knead." And the Duke of Harcourt had taken off his fine coat and rolled up his own sleeves, and kneaded bread beside her at the great scrubbed table in the afternoon light, clumsily, while she corrected his technique and laughed at him, and it was, he thought, the happiest hour he had spent in his adult life. The cold, formal, feared Duke of Harcourt, up to his wrists in dough, in a kitchen, being laughed at by a woman with flour on her nose, and not a soul in the world wanting anything from him but that he knead a little more evenly. "You are terrible at this," Margaret informed him. "I have never made bread in my life. I am a duke. I did not know dukes were permitted in kitchens." "They are not," Margaret said. "That is rather the point. You are breaking a great many rules by being here, Your Grace, and I find I like you enormously for it. A man who will knead bread in a kitchen for no reason but to be near a woman is a man worth a great deal more than a man who will only ever meet her in a drawing room. My father used to come to the kitchen. Before he married, before everything, he used to come down and steal warm bread and talk to me while I baked, when I was small, before I was anyone's drudge. It is my happiest memory of him, and I had not been able to bear the kitchen for 6 years without weeping for it. And now you are here, kneading badly and making me laugh, and I find the memory does not hurt anymore. You have given the kitchen back to me twice, Julian. Once by restoring my freedom, and once, just now, by filling it with a happy hour, so that it is not only my father's ghost that lives here, but a living man, who came down to be near me. Thank you for that. I do not think you even knew you were doing it." And the Duke of Harcourt had looked at her across the flowery table and understood that he was watching a woman heal in front of him, take the very room of her imprisonment and fill it, deliberately, with joy, until it could no longer hurt her. And he had loved her so much in that moment that he had nearly proposed on the spot, dough and all, and had held himself back only because he had promised her a free and unhurried choice, and meant to keep the promise however it cost him. But he had known, kneading bread in the afternoon light while she laughed at him, that whenever the choice came, and whatever she chose, he would never in his life want any other woman, because there was no other woman in England who could take the room where she had been broken and make bread in it out of pure joy, and teach a duke to knead, and heal her own oldest wound by filling it with warmth. That was strength. That was the thing Mrs. Combe had seen, and the Duke of Harcourt, flowery and happy, understood that his old nurse had, as usual, been entirely right about everything. He proposed on a golden afternoon at the end of the summer, in the garden of Fenwick Grange, the house he had restored to her, and he did it, characteristically, by first making certain she was free to refuse. "I have waited," he said, "until you were entirely yourself, and entirely free, and had seen enough of the world and of me to choose with your eyes open. I think you have. So I am going to ask you now, Margaret, and I want you to hear, before I do, that your whole life is secure whatever you answer. The house is yours. The fortune is yours. Your place in the world is yours. None of it depends on me or on this question, and if you refuse me, you lose nothing at all but the pleasure of my conversation, which you may find you can spare. I have made very sure of that, on purpose, so that nothing hangs on your answer but the answer itself." He took her hands. "I love you. I have loved you since Mrs. Combe wept, telling me about the girl who ran into the rain and called herself no one. Loved the idea of you then, and the whole reality of you since, more with every month of this year. You are the finest person I have ever known, and I do not mean the kindest only, though you are that. I mean the finest, the bravest, the cleverest, the most wholly good, and the most unaware of it, which is the rarest part. I have spent my life among people who wanted my title. You are the one woman in England I am certain wants nothing from me at all, because you have your own house and your own fortune, and your own name, all restored, and you need me for precisely nothing, which means that if you will have me, it can only be because you want me, the man, and that is worth more to me than I can say. So, Margaret Fenwick, mistress of your own house, free woman, finest soul in England, will you marry me? Not to be rescued. You have rescued yourself. Not for security. You have your own. Only because you want to. Will you?" And Margaret Fenwick, who had been hidden in a kitchen and called no one, and was now a free woman in her own garden being asked by a man she loved to choose him with her eyes open, smiled, the whole 6 years of drudgery falling away from her face, the girl she had been meant to be shining out at last. "Do you know," she said, "for 6 years I told myself I wanted nothing, because wanting was dangerous, because a girl in a kitchen who lets herself want things only breaks her own heart. And you gave me back my freedom and told me to discover what I wanted, and I was almost afraid to, because I had forgotten how. And do you know what I discovered, Your Grace, when I finally let myself want things again?" She lifted his hands to her heart. "I discovered that I wanted you, not your rank. I have my own consequence now, and find I care nothing for yours. Not your rescue. I am rescued, and standing on my own feet, in my own garden. Just you. The man who crossed a county because an old woman asked him to. The man who restored my whole life and then left, so that I might choose freely. The man who has made very sure, even in proposing, that I am free to say no, which is exactly why I am so entirely, joyfully free to say yes. Yes, Julian, I want you. Freely. With my eyes open, having considered the whole wide world you gave back to me, and chosen you out of all of it. Yes." And the Duke of Harcourt drew the once hidden girl into his arms in her own garden, and the kitchen, and the cruelty, and the 6 years of being called no one, were finished forever. They were married in the autumn, and it was, by Margaret's own design, an enormous and public wedding, because she had spent 6 years hidden, and she found she had a great appetite now for being seen, and because the whole county wished to celebrate the wronged heiress restored, and she saw no reason to deny them. Mrs. Pennington and her daughters were not at the wedding, but their fate was, in the end, settled by Margaret's own hand, and it settled a great deal about the woman Margaret was. For when the accounting was complete and the fraud fully documented, Margaret had it in her power to prosecute her stepmother, to see her ruined, disgraced, perhaps imprisoned, as she richly deserved. The Duke would have supported it. The law would have allowed it. And Margaret, who had 6 years of cruelty to avenge, considered it seriously, and then chose otherwise. "I have thought about it a great deal," she told the Duke, "and I find I do not want to spend the first act of my free life being cruel, even to someone who earned it. Not because she deserves mercy, she does not, but because I deserve better than to begin my happiness with a prosecution. If I ruin her, I will have let her make me, at the last, a little like herself. I would rather not. So this is what I have decided. She will repay what can be repaid, and she will live, modestly and quietly, on the small allowance I choose to grant her. Not out of love, God knows, but out of a refusal to become her. And she will know, every day of that small quiet life, that she is living on the charity of the girl she called no one, and hid in a kitchen, and that the girl chose mercy where she herself would have chosen ruin. That is a better punishment than prison, I think, for a woman like her. Let her spend the rest of her life being spared by the person she most despised. It will gall her far more than a cell would, and it will keep my own hands clean, and Gwendolen and Arabella, who were cruel, but who were also only doing as their mother taught them, will have a chance, perhaps, to become something better away from her influence. That is my judgment. I would rather be merciful and free than vengeful and bound. I have had enough of being bound." And the Duke of Harcourt, listening to his wife choose mercy over vengeance, not from weakness, but from a clear, strong refusal to be diminished, understood exactly why Mrs. Combe had wept, and thought that he had married not merely the kindest woman in England, but the strongest, because it takes far more strength to spare an enemy than to crush one, and Margaret Fenwick had strength to spare. The marriage was long and happy and busy. The Duchess of Harcourt became known throughout the county and beyond, for one cause above all others, the protection and elevation of the overlooked. The servants treated as less than human, the poor relations reduced to drudges, the quiet, unregarded women hidden in the kitchens of grand houses and told they were no one. She had a particular instinct for finding them, having been one, and a particular joy in lifting them, and there was many a girl in many a scullery whose whole life turned, over the years, on the day the Duchess of Harcourt looked past the servant's cap and saw the person, and asked her name, and would not be told she was no one. "You always ask their names," the Duke observed once, watching his wife draw out a terrified little kitchen maid at some grand house they were visiting, coaxing the child's name and story from her with infinite gentleness, while the mistress of the house looked on in astonishment. "Everywhere we go, the scullery maids, the drudges, the ones no one sees, you always find them, and you always ask their names." "Because someone asked mine," Margaret said simply. "Once, when I had been no one for 6 years, a man crossed a county and walked into a drawing room and asked for me by name and bowed to me in my wet apron as though I were a lady, and it changed my entire life. I know exactly what it is to be no one, Julian, to be looked past 1,000 times a day, to have decided that no one will ever see you, to have stopped even hoping. And I know exactly what it is to have one person, just one, look past the cap and the apron and the story you've been buried under, and see you, and ask your name. It is the most powerful thing in the world. It cost you nothing, and it gave me everything. So I do it wherever I go, for whoever I can, because it is the truest thing I know, that there is no such thing as no one. There are only people the world has agreed not to look at, and all it takes to undo that, all it ever takes, is one person willing to look and to ask. You taught me that, in a drawing room, in my wet apron. I have spent my whole happy life passing it on. And she turned back to the trembling kitchen maid and smiled and asked her again, gently, what her name was. And somewhere in the vast machinery of the world, one more hidden person was seen, because a duke had once crossed a county to ask for the girl they had hidden in the kitchen, and had found, and named, and cherished the finest soul in England.